Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The sun hung lazily over the dusty roadside where Sarah sat beside her charcoal grill, turning rows of golden corn with calloused fingers. Her dark skin shimmered with sweat, but she didn't flinch. Each hiss of the fire, each turn of the corn, was a rhythm she'd memorized like prayer. The roadside buzzed faintly, with the sounds of traffic and vendors shouting in the distance. Her stall, patched with wooden planks and faded cloth, stood humbly beside a rusted signboard that once advertised prepaid SIM cards. Children passed by and greeted her with innocent smiles. "Andy, Sarah, dash us one," one of them teased. She chuckled and handed over a half-burnt cob. "Share it with your sister, eh?" she said softly. There was a weariness in her eyes, but behind it, something stronger, an unshakable resolve that refused to fade. As the clouds gathered and the air shifted, a light drizzle began to fall, but Sarah didn't move. She simply pulled the faded Ankara scarf from her basket and wrapped it over her braided hair. Her grill sizzled louder as drops hit the coals, sending steam into the air. Yet she remained steady, her hands working with the same grace. Anyone who walked by would only see a woman selling roasted corn. What they couldn't see were the textbooks beneath her bench or the earphones hidden in her bag, ready for her online lecture after nightfall. Her life looked simple, maybe even pitiful to some, but it was layered with purpose. As she flipped another cob, she looked toward the long stretch of road and whispered under her breath, "It's not forever." Her voice cracked slightly, but there was no bitterness in it, just a quiet promise to herself. The smoky scent of roasted corn clung to Sarah's clothes, but her mind was miles away. She sat under the shade of her faded umbrella, her gaze locked on the road, yet seeing nothing. It wasn't the noise or the occasional customer that held her hostage. It was a memory. A moment from years ago when her life had a different rhythm. She had just turned 24, and Francis had knelt on one knee in a crowded eatery, holding a ring they both couldn't afford. They had laughed as she slid the cheap band on her finger, promising each other greatness. "You and me against the world, eh?" he had said, rubbing her hand gently. But that world had swallowed them differently. What remained now were echoes of their laughter, muted by his betrayal. She thought she'd moved on, until moments like this reminded her she hadn't forgotten. Forgiven, maybe, but never forgotten. Her eyes welled unexpectedly, and she quickly dabbed them with the hem of her wrapper as a customer approached. "Andy, Sarah, give me 3 well-roasted," the woman requested. Sarah nodded, reaching for the hottest pieces. But her mind drifted again. She remembered the day Francis walked out. He had changed, not all at once, but gradually, like a man drifting out to sea. "I can't live on promises anymore," he had told her, his voice cool, distant. "This life we're chasing, you're slowing me down." That sentence had bruised her more than any slap could. It wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the rejection of her worth. She shook her head as she handed the corn over and collected her payment. The sun shifted slightly, casting shadows across her stall. She whispered again, this time louder, "I'm not slow. I just refuse to take shortcuts." The wind carried her words away, but they lingered in her chest like armor. Sarah was counting her remaining corn cobs when she heard the familiar sound of Gloria's laughter. Turning toward the sound, she spotted her best friend striding across the street, stylish as ever in her orange blouse and jeans, balancing a paper bag in one hand. "I brought Zobo and Chin-Chin." "Figured you'd forgotten to eat again," Gloria said, placing the bag beside Sarah's basket. "How's business?" Sarah gave a small smile. "Enough to buy data for school and pepper soup on Sunday." They both chuckled, but Gloria's tone soon turned serious. "I saw Francis yesterday," she began, stirring the Zobo with her straw. Sarah's fingers froze mid-turn. "He's back?" she asked without looking up. "He is, with a lady who looks like she's been dipped in gold. Expensive weave, fake accent, big laugh." Gloria rolled her eyes, and he paraded her like a trophy. Sarah gave a tight nod. Good for him. But Gloria wasn't done. "You need to brace yourself, girl. He may show up here. Men like him can't resist parading where they once planted." Sarah looked away, her jaw tightening. If he comes, I won't hide, she replied. Gloria leaned forward, her tone softer. I just don't want you caught off guard. You've built something solid. Don't let his shadows shake your light. Sarah met her friend's gaze, and for a moment they sat in quiet understanding. I'm not afraid of him, Sarah said quietly, but I'm afraid of how my heart might still react. Gloria reached out and squeezed her hand. Then prepare it. Lock the doors if you must, but don't let him break in again. Sarah nodded slowly. The sun began to dip, and Gloria stood. Call me if he shows up. I'll come running like a mad woman. Sarah laughed. You've always been my personal bouncer. And I'll remain so, Gloria replied. Just stay strong. The hum of approaching tires drew Sarah's attention as she flipped another cob. A sleek black SUV slowed beside her stall, its windows rolled halfway down. She glanced sideways, and her heart sank. It was Francis. She hadn't seen him in years, but he looked unchanged, maybe a little heavier, but still wearing that smug, self-assured smirk. Beside him sat a woman with curled burgundy hair, long lashes, and a disgusted expression. Is this where you roast our love? Francis called out, loud enough for nearby pedestrians to turn. I guess you took hot and smoky too, literally. His laughter erupted, cruel and echoing. The woman beside him burst into giggles, shielding her nose with a handkerchief. Smells like poverty, she sneered. Sarah's hand froze above the fire. A part of her wanted to disappear. Another part wanted to scream. But instead, she simply stood. Calm, silent. Her eyes didn't meet his, but her back remained straight. She turned a cob with measured care, then wrapped it in foil for a waiting customer who handed her 2 crumpled notes and looked away awkwardly. Francis revved the engine, laughing louder. Glad I dodged this life, he shouted. You could have been my liability, not my lady. Then the car sped off. Sarah's vision blurred, but no tears fell. She sat down, her legs trembling beneath her wrapper. A young boy selling sachet water walked past and offered her a cold one for free. Sorry, Auntie, he said, voice soft. Sarah took it, whispered thanks, and stared ahead. The same road that had brought mockery would someday carry her miracle. She didn't need to respond. Life would. The street had gone quiet by 11:45 p.m. Sarah's stall was long packed up, and her corn-stained wrapper now hung on the bathroom hook. Wearing a faded T-shirt and sitting on the cold cement floor of her small apartment, she plugged in her laptop, its hinges slightly cracked but faithful. She placed a rechargeable lamp beside her and opened the online portal of McKenna International University, a Canadian institution offering flexible remote master's programs. Her screen lit up with the login page, and within moments, Sarah was back in class virtually. The lecture on global leadership models in emerging economies had begun. As the professor spoke in a crisp Canadian accent, Sarah scribbled notes feverishly in a dog-eared notebook, occasionally pausing to rewatch sections she didn't understand. Her eyes, though tired, sparkled. The woman mocked for selling corn was learning how to lead economies, and doing it barefoot in a dim room in Enugu. At the end of the 90-minute lecture, Sarah submitted her weekly assessment. The screen flashed, submission received, grade pending. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." But a voice in her mind pushed in, the echo of Francis's laughter earlier that day. It stung, but it also fueled her. She opened another tab and checked her scholarship installment. Just enough had come in to cover next month's data and tuition. She smiled. Every cob of corn she sold brought her a step closer to her future. As she began outlining her thesis proposal, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Madame Ozioma, her academic mentor. Your perspective on resourceful leadership is exceptional. Proud of you. Sarah stared at the screen, her chest rising slowly as tears pooled quietly in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the beauty of unseen progress. Her world was hidden from many, but it was moving, and one day it would speak loudly for itself. Michael stood at the door of Sarah's flat the next morning, holding a small bag of groceries and a loaf of agage bread. You didn't answer my calls last night, he said as she opened the door, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I was in class, she replied, stepping aside to let him in. He frowned, placing the bag on the counter. You look drained, Sarah. How long will you keep running on roasted corn and borrowed energy? She gave a weak laugh. Until I'm where I want to be. Michael sat across from her, studying her. You're my sister, not a soldier. I see your strength, but I see your bones too. Let me help. Let me at least support your tuition. Sarah shook her head firmly. This journey, it has to be mine. Every inch. If I take shortcuts now, I'll always wonder if I deserve the destination. Michael sighed and leaned back. But there's no shame in needing help, Sarah. That doesn't mean you didn't earn it. She reached across the table and held his hand. You've always been my backbone, Mike. But this part, I need to prove to myself that even with ashes on my hands, I can build something golden. He looked at her, his eyes soft. Then promise me you'll rest. Promise me if it ever gets too heavy, you'll call. She smiled and nodded, though in her heart she knew she wouldn't. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she didn't want anyone else carrying the weight of a dream they hadn't planted. They shared breakfast in quiet unity, the way only siblings who'd walked through fire could. Later, as Michael left, he turned and said, Next time I come, don't make me drag you to the hospital. And eat more than chin-chin and pride. Sarah laughed, a full, honest laugh this time. Deal. The rainstorm arrived without mercy that Saturday. Thick drops crashed onto the tin roofs, turning the dusty roadside into brown streams. Sarah, determined not to lose a day's earnings, had stubbornly set up her stall under a borrowed canopy. But the wind was unkind and water trickled down the sides, soaking her firewood. She tried to shield the flames with a broken piece of zinc, but the fire sputtered and hissed. Her feet slipped on the slick ground, and before she could catch herself, she fell, right into the muddy path. Her wrapper was soaked, her palms scraped, and the scattered corn rolled into the drainage. A peal of laughter erupted not far away. She looked up through raindrops and mud to see Francis again, this time standing beside his parked car, holding an umbrella while Gladys filmed with her phone. Still chasing degrees in the gutter, he jeered. Should we call the UN to rescue you? Gladys giggled cruelly. Post it. Let's see if motivational speakers can spin this one. Francis tossed a yellow umbrella toward her. It landed in the mud. You might need this more than hope. The SUV sped off, splashing water in their wake. Sarah sat there frozen, not from cold, but humiliation. People had seen. Some looked away in pity, others in silence. She forced herself to stand, her clothes clinging to her skin, her dignity torn, but not dead. She didn't pick up the umbrella. Instead, she picked up a half-burnt cob from the ground and walked home slowly, barefoot. That night, as she washed her bruised hands, her reflection in the cracked mirror caught her off guard. Wet, bruised, and raw, but her eyes still held fire. She whispered, One day, not even mud will recognize me. The sound of rain still lingered in Sarah's ears as she curled up on the floor of her bedroom, her wrapper draped loosely over her shoulders, now dry but stained with mud. Her body ached, but it was the ache inside that unraveled her. She clutched her knees to her chest and stared blankly at the flickering light bulb above, the corners of her lips trembling. All day she had forced herself to pretend, to smile politely at her landlord, to greet her neighbors, to clean the mud from her stall frame. But now, in the quiet of her room, the mask cracked. A single sob escaped her, then another. Before she could stop it, the flood came. Why do they hate me so much? She whispered. Why does he enjoy watching me like this? Her breath hitched with each question. The strength she wore like armor had crumbled, and all that was left was a wounded girl who had once dreamed with a man now weaponizing her struggle. A knock came at the door, followed by Gloria's voice. Sarah, open. I heard what happened. Sarah hesitated, then stood slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She opened the door, and Gloria stepped in, took one look at her, and dropped her purse. Oh my God, what did he do now? Sarah tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Gloria pulled her into a tight embrace. Cry if you need to. You're allowed to be human, Sarah. And she did. For minutes, she cried into her friend's shoulder, while Gloria held her like she was holding a shattered heirloom. Later, as they sat on the bed, Gloria handed her a flask of warm pepper soup and bread. Eat. Your dignity isn't in your clothes or your stall. It's in your refusal to stay down. Sarah took a bite, chewing slowly. Then, she reached for her laptop and placed it on her thighs. I have a paper due in 4 hours. I can't miss the deadline. Gloria stared at her, speechless. You're unbelievable, she whispered. No, Sarah said with a faint smile. I'm becoming unstoppable. The stall was quiet the next evening. Sarah had just finished stacking her remaining corn when she noticed a man staggering along the edge of the road, a bottle in his hand and slurred curses tumbling from his mouth. He stopped near her canopy, swaying on unsteady feet. "Sister, give me one," he mumbled. She politely declined, explaining she was packing up. But before she could turn away, the man kicked a stone into her fire pit. Flames jumped, and in the chaos, his bottle of gin slipped from his fingers, shattering into the fire. In seconds, the flames roared up, licking the underside of her canopy. "Jesus!" Sarah screamed, rushing to grab her basin and shout for help. A nearby shopkeeper ran over with a fire extinguisher, but it was too late. Her stall, her only source of income, was swallowed in a hiss of smoke and heat. The onlookers gasped and whispered. Some filmed, some simply stared. Later that night, as she sat by the charred remains of what had once been her business, her phone vibrated. A notification. Her heart dropped. It was a social media post, Francis's page. A picture of the burning stall, zoomed in on the flames. The caption read, "No corn, no future." The likes were climbing, and the comments were worse. Sarah stared at the screen, her chest hollow. Her first instinct was to cry again, but she stopped herself. Instead, she powered off her phone and looked at the ashes around her. It wasn't just a fire. It was a funeral of her efforts, of countless days under the sun and nights behind books. Gloria arrived minutes later, speechless at the scene. "He posted it?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "He did." Gloria crouched beside her. "So what next?" Sarah didn't answer. She stood, dusted her palms, and picked up the only unburnt plank. "We rise," she said, voice hoarse. "Even from smoke, we rise." Sarah was still recovering from the fire, mentally and physically, when an email lit up her inbox 3 days later. She sat on her floor, surrounded by old assignments, searching for motivation to keep going. Her fingers hesitated over the trackpad before she opened the message from McKenna International University. The subject line read, "Thesis feedback, grade released." She clicked it slowly, her breath stuck in her throat. Then her eyes widened as she read the first line. "Congratulations. Final grade A+ exceptional research. Your insights into leadership resilience in developing economies were profound and original." For a moment, she simply stared at the words. Then her hands began to tremble. She pressed a palm over her mouth as tears welled, this time not from pain, but from hard-earned victory. All the 2 a.m. writing sessions, the lectures with generator noise in the background, the days she typed with ash-stained fingers, they had not been in vain. She forwarded the email to Gloria with a simple message. "We did it." Seconds later, Gloria called. "Sarah, I'm screaming. I told you. I told you you're made of more than this earth can measure." Sarah laughed through her tears. "I needed this. After the fire, I started doubting." Gloria replied firmly, "The fire was just a distraction. But look, your mind is on fire too, and that one can't be put out." Sarah smiled and walked over to the window. Outside, the street buzzed as usual, unaware that in one tiny room, a woman had just taken her biggest step toward the life she never stopped believing in. She whispered to herself, "Someday I'll walk into a boardroom, and this A+ will be in my stride." And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to dream out loud again. The morning sun streamed through Sarah's window as she sat at her desk, her fingers hovering above her laptop keyboard. The charred remains of her stall were still visible in the back of her mind, but today she focused on planting seeds elsewhere. Her resume sat open, perfectly tailored with every ounce of effort she'd poured into her academic and practical life over the last 2 years. It wasn't long, but it was rich, highlighting her thesis, volunteer leadership roles in online student communities, and her recent certification in ethical management. She exhaled deeply before attaching it to the application portal of a multinational company with headquarters expanding into West Africa. She didn't expect magic, but she owed it to herself to try. Clicking submit, she leaned back and whispered, "Let's see if the world's ready." Later that evening, Sarah confided in Gloria over a steaming bowl of ogbono soup. "I sent in the application," she said, pushing a piece of meat around with her spoon. Gloria's eyes widened. "To where?" "Levant & Co., Sarah replied. "They're opening new branches across Africa." One of the roles is Regional Director for Strategy and Development. Gloria blinked. Director, not assistant? Sarah met her eyes. If I aim low, I'll land low. I've worked too hard to beg for space at the table. I'll bring my own chair. Gloria grinned, lifting her spoon. Then here's to your chair, and to the ones who underestimated you. Sarah clinked her spoon against Gloria's in silent celebration. It wasn't about desperation anymore. It was about direction, and she was finally walking towards something bigger than survival. Sarah arrived home from the market one dusty afternoon to find a small white bag resting on her doorstep. Attached to it was a yellow sticky note that read, "Every queen needs a pair. Gee," she smiled knowingly. Pulling the bag inside, she sat on the floor and gently unwrapped its contents. Inside was a pair of second-hand gold ballet flats, slightly worn at the heels, but still elegant. Sarah held them in her hands as if they were glass slippers. A tear escaped as she whispered, "She never stops believing in me." That evening, she wore them during her live online group presentation. As she spoke about adaptive leadership and socioeconomic reform, the camera caught her full posture, confident, articulate, and grounded in golden shoes that told a bigger story. Later that night, Gloria called. "Did they fit?" she asked excitedly. Sarah chuckled. "Like they were waiting for my feet." Gloria's voice softened. "You're walking out of ashes, Sar. And when you do, I want you doing it in gold, even if it's borrowed." Sarah looked down at the shoes beside her bed and smiled. "These are more than shoes. They're a reminder that I still have people in my corner, even when I feel cornered." Gloria's voice cracked slightly. "I'll always be here. You don't need millions to stand tall. You just need people who see you." Sarah paused, nodding to herself. "And shoes that don't break when life throws you into fire." They both laughed, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah fell asleep without that heavy knot in her chest. It was still hard, but the weight was lighter now, shared in small acts of grace. It was supposed to be a quick grocery run. Sarah had come to pick up eggs, onions, and a sachet of detergent. But fate had other plans. As she stepped into the aisle for salt, she heard a familiar laugh, sharp, theatrical, and deliberately loud. Turning slowly, she met eyes with Gladys, dressed in a tight velvet jumpsuit and holding a branded shopping bag. "Well, well," Gladys sneered, "if it isn't the Corn Empress herself." Sarah remained silent, gripping her shopping basket tighter. Gladys stepped closer, her heels clacking against the tiled floor. "Still playing Cinderella in Lagos, son? Or has the charcoal market turned you into a motivational speaker now?" Her voice dripped with cruelty, each word aimed to cut deeper than the last. But Sarah didn't flinch. She'd bled too long to be broken by mere words. Instead, she gave a small, measured smile. "Salt," Sarah said, placing the pack into her basket, "is only bitter when taken alone." She turned to walk away, but Gladys followed. "You know, Francis said you'd never amount to more than smoke and stories. You're just lucky the world doesn't always see the dirt under a woman's fingernails." Sarah paused at the checkout counter, finally turning fully to face her. "Tell Francis that sometimes the woman in the mud rises to lead men in suits. And when that day comes, I won't remember your words, just the lesson in them." She paid her bill, stepped into her golden flats, and walked out without another glance. The cashier stared after her in awe, whispering, "Who is that woman?" Gladys stood frozen, her confidence briefly shaken. Sarah didn't need to win arguments anymore. She was preparing to win battles. The morning light filtered through thin curtains as Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, sipping lukewarm pap from a ceramic bowl. She had no plans for the day other than to read a chapter from her leadership textbook and maybe rewrite her personal statement for future job applications. But then her phone buzzed. It was an email notification. She tapped it open without thinking and froze. Subject: Interview invitation, Regional Director position. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The sender was Levant & Co., the same multinational firm she had applied to just days earlier. Her eyes scanned the message again and again, hands trembling as she read the instructions. Virtual pre-screening completed. In-person panel scheduled in Lagos in 7 days. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice caught between disbelief and joy. "They saw me. They actually saw me." Tears clouded her vision as she pressed a hand over her mouth. Her heart raced. Her name, Sarah Okafor, was printed right there in bold, formal font as the confirmed candidate. She reached for her phone and dialed Gloria. "Pick up, pick up." Gloria finally answered on the third ring, breathless. "What's wrong?" "They chose me," Sarah gasped. "The interview. I made it to the final stage. It's happening, Gloria. It's really happening." There was silence on the line for a heartbeat. Then Gloria screamed so loud Sarah had to pull the phone from her ear. "I told you," she yelled. "Did I not say you were born for this? Lagos, here we come." They both laughed and cried in equal measure. After they hung up, Sarah sat in stillness. She stared at the email again and whispered, "God, I don't know what you're doing, but thank you for not forgetting me." This wasn't just an interview. It was an open door carved from ashes. 2 days before her journey, Sarah returned to the site where her stall once stood. The blackened earth had begun to fade, overtaken by new dust and sprouting weeds. She brought a small wooden box and a folded note. As she knelt down, she ran her fingers over the ground with reverence, not sorrow. There was no bitterness in her eyes, only gratitude. "This place taught me things no classroom ever could," she murmured, "like how to stand when mocked, how to smile when bruised, how to fight silently without making noise." She dug a small hole and placed the box inside. Inside it were burnt charcoal pieces, a cracked spoon, and her first corn wrapping foil. Then she buried it carefully and stood to her feet. In her other hand, she held the note. With a single stone, she pinned it to a nearby pole where customers used to wait. It read, "To whoever passes this place, do not laugh at struggle. This ground raised someone who will soon walk into places she once only read about. And if you're struggling too, don't stop. You're being shaped." Sarah stepped back, read it once more, and smiled. She adjusted her wrapper, slipped on her gold flats, and took one last look at the street she had once been laughed at. There was no crowd cheering, no music playing, but she knew she was walking away from something she had truly conquered. As she left, a little girl came running up the path with a bundle of maize. She paused at the note, read it slowly, then looked at Sarah's back as she faded into the sunlit path. The girl whispered to no one in particular, "One day, I'll be like her." And the wind, gentle and warm, carried Sarah's journey forward. Back at home, Gloria and Michael had taken it upon themselves to transform Sarah's appearance for the upcoming interview. They laid fabrics, blouses, and shoes across the bed like stylists prepping a celebrity. Gloria held up a navy blue blazer. "Too stiff?" she asked. "Just right," Sarah replied. Michael brought out a pair of tailored black trousers from his own wardrobe. "You'll need to adjust the waistline, but this is clean. You'll look like you already own the building." Sarah tried them on, stepping in front of the mirror. The reflection surprised her. She looked powerful. Not just because of the clothes, but because of the scars she wore beneath them, scars that didn't show, but had built the woman she was now becoming. Gloria smiled as she adjusted Sarah's braids into a soft bun. "When you sit at that panel, don't try to be impressive. Just be you, the world will adjust." That evening, they had a mock interview in Sarah's room. Michael played the CEO, asking tough questions with a straight face. "Why should we pick you, Miss Okafor, when there are candidates with more experience?" Sarah smiled confidently. "Because experience builds competence. But resilience, that builds leaders. And I have resilience in every fiber of my being." Gloria clapped dramatically from the corner. "You just hired yourself, girl." They all laughed, their joy heartfelt and unfiltered. Later that night, as Sarah folded her chosen outfit and placed it into a small travel bag, she paused for a long moment. "I don't know what's waiting for me in Lagos," she said softly, "but I know who I'm bringing there." And she's no longer afraid. Michael touched her shoulder. "We'll be right behind you, even if only in prayer." She nodded, her eyes glistening with purpose. Lagos wasn't just a city. It was destiny knocking. The morning Sarah left for Lagos, the air held a sacred stillness. She stood in front of her mirror, dressed in her neatly ironed blazer, black trousers, and her cherished gold flats. Gloria adjusted the collar of her shirt, while Michael zipped her small luggage. "Your resume's strong, your voice is stronger, but your journey," Michael said, handing her a small envelope. "That's what makes you different." Sarah opened it to find a folded prayer note with Psalm 18, verse 35, written in his bold handwriting. Your gentleness has made me great. She pressed it to her chest. I'll carry this with me, she whispered. Outside, their neighbor, Mama A's, waved and handed Sarah a sachet of groundnut. For strength, she smiled. Even the taxi driver, sensing the moment, opened the door with unusual care. As the car pulled off, Gloria shouted, You're not just going to Lagos, you're going to your future. The journey took hours, winding through pothole-laced roads and speeding past forests and towns. Sarah stared out the window, her heart alternating between excitement and apprehension. Lagos rose on the horizon like a different planet, bustling, chaotic, alive. As she reached her hotel, she clutched her bag tightly, overwhelmed by the city's aggressive rhythm. She checked in quietly, trying not to feel out of place amidst polished marble floors and men in suits. Her room was modest but clean. As she unpacked, she carefully hung her interview outfit on the wardrobe door, smoothed out the creases, and sat by the window to review her notes. She hadn't come all this way to second-guess herself. That night, she knelt by the bed, whispering prayers for clarity, for calm. Help me speak with the dignity I've earned, she said. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it wrapped her like a friend. She didn't dream of Francis. She dreamt of a door opening. The morning of the interview, Lagos hummed outside her hotel window with impatient horns and hawker chants, but Sarah moved with quiet precision. She wore her navy blazer, tucked in her white blouse, and stepped into her gold flats. As she stood before the mirror applying light powder to her cheeks, her hands trembled, not out of fear, but reverence for how far she had come. Her phone buzzed. Gloria had sent a voice note. Look at you. You were once hidden by smoke, now you'll shine in glass towers. Don't walk in like someone applying, walk in like someone arriving. Sarah smiled, replaying the message twice before switching off her phone. She gathered her folder, checked her documents, and whispered to herself, Be seen, be heard, be unshaken. Then she stepped out, the city air hitting her face like a challenge. When she arrived at the Levant & Co. building, the glass doors loomed tall, and the receptionist smiled professionally. You're here for the strategy interview. Sarah nodded, handing over her invitation. Please wait on the 7th floor. The elevator ride was silent, but her mind wasn't. She rehearsed answers, reminded herself of data points, her research themes, and the power of her story. The elevator dinged, and she stepped out into a waiting area lined with other candidates in sleek suits. Most of them looked older, more polished. Some glanced her way, curious, even dismissive. She didn't shrink. Instead, she sat quietly and opened a small notepad, reviewing her leadership framework. That's when she heard it, a laugh. Familiar, arrogant, loud. Her heart stopped. She looked up slowly and saw him, Francis. Dressed in a fitted blue suit, adjusting his watch, joking with one of the other candidates. She didn't panic, but her hand tightened slightly around her pen. He hadn't seen her yet. Let's see how this plays out, she muttered under her breath. The calm fire stirred in her chest. Francis strutted into the room with the air of a man who believed it already belonged to him. His cologne announced him, sharp and intentional, and he smirked as he greeted the receptionist like a celebrity familiar with every room. But that smirk faltered the moment his eyes landed on Sarah. His eyebrows lifted, and for a fraction of a second, disbelief registered in his face. Sarah? He asked, loud enough to draw attention. Sarah didn't look up. She continued reading. Well, if it isn't Madame Corn, he said with a mocking chuckle. Hope you're not here for janitorial services? Laughter erupted from two candidates nearby. Sarah finally lifted her gaze, eyes steady. No, she replied coolly. I'm here to sit at the table. You. Francis scoffed and looked away, muttering, Dreams are cheap these days. The receptionist returned. Mr. Francis, Miss Sarah, please come with me. You're first. As they walked down the hallway, Sarah walked one step ahead, not intentionally, but naturally. The room they entered had a long panel table with 3 interviewers seated, 2 men in suits and a graceful woman with locks and sharp eyes. They motioned them to sit. Francis tried to joke his way into comfort, but his laugh didn't land. Sarah, on the other hand, offered a quiet smile and greeted each panelist confidently. Thank you for having me. The woman on the panel nodded. We've reviewed both of your files. Today is about vision and leadership. Sarah folded her hands calmly. Francis shifted in his seat, clearly unsettled by her composure. The room, which had once echoed with mockery, was now silent and heavy with expectation. Sarah was no longer the girl beside a grill. She was the woman sitting on the edge of her future. Francis leaned back in his chair, confident smirk returning as he interrupted the first question meant for both candidates. I believe leadership is about commanding presence. Knowing how to take charge and get people moving without waiting for permission, he said, tapping his pen for effect. The lead panelist, Mr. Oyalik, nodded slowly but didn't smile. He turned to Sarah. And you, Miss Okafor? What does leadership mean to you? Sarah straightened, her voice low but firm. Leadership is less about volume and more about influence. It's not just getting people to move. It's helping them understand why they're moving, so even in your absence, they continue. There was a pause, then a subtle nod from the woman panelist. That's a perspective grounded in sustainability, she commented. Francis chuckled. Sounds poetic, but does it work in real business? Mr. Oyalik raised a hand. Let's allow each candidate space. This is not a debate. The next round focused on scenario-based leadership tasks. Francis struggled with data interpretation, fumbling through numbers while trying to charm his way forward. Sarah, on the other hand, pulled out real statistics from her thesis. In post-conflict economies, trust is currency. If you don't lead with transparency, you won't survive beyond Q2, she explained, referencing a case study in Sierra Leone. As she spoke, one of the panelists began scribbling quick notes. Francis shifted uncomfortably, the light in his eyes dimming slightly. Sarah felt the room tilt, not in her favor, but into balance. For the first time, her journey wasn't being dismissed or pitied. It was being considered. And for a woman who had once been treated as invisible, that recognition was louder than applause. When the session ended, the panelists thanked them both and promised a final decision within 48 hours. Outside the room, Francis approached her with a half-smile. You speak well, for someone who once sold roasted dreams. Sarah looked him in the eyes and replied, maybe. But you'll soon find out that roasted dreams can feed empires. The following day, all shortlisted candidates were invited back to the conference hall for a networking brunch and official introduction to the newly appointed regional director. Sarah arrived dressed in a soft emerald blouse, a borrowed clutch in hand, and her gold flats polished with care. The room buzzed with anticipation as people speculated on who had been selected. Francis stood in a corner surrounded by two other applicants, confidently recounting stories of his past roles. It's a formality, he said, chuckling. They'll just announce it for PR. But when Mr. Jacobs, the head of HR, walked to the front with a microphone, the room fell into hush. Thank you all for participating in this incredible recruitment process, he began. We had strong contenders, but one candidate stood out for her vision, knowledge, and resilience. He paused for effect, glancing at a woman just off stage. Please welcome your new regional director for West Africa, Miss Sarah Okafor. Time slowed. Gasps filled the room. Francis's jaw dropped, the color draining from his face as he turned to see Sarah walking to the stage, composed, graceful, unstoppable. She didn't look at him. Her eyes remained focused on the panelists and the welcoming applause from executives. As she took the mic, she smiled gently. I'm honored, not because this role validates me, but because it allows me to create paths for others like me, those whose brilliance is buried beneath circumstances. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't nervous. She was home. Mr. Jacobs clapped beside her and whispered, We've never had a candidate like you. In the crowd, Francis remained silent, unable to reconcile the woman before him with the image he had mocked on a roadside. He clutched his resume tightly, not because it gave him hope, but because he suddenly realized he was standing in a room owned by the very woman he once left behind. Sarah wasn't just announced. She was revealed. The executive team had arranged a short final session that afternoon. Sarah would now be sitting on the other side of the table, observing follow-up interviews with select candidates for other leadership roles, including Francis. She sat confidently beside Mr. Jacobs, reviewing documents. When Francis walked in, he stiffened upon seeing her at the panel. "You'll be part of this?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. Sarah offered a polite nod. "I'm part of the decision-making team now." He gave a nervous laugh. "Wow, life really spins the wheel, doesn't it?" Mr. Jacobs didn't reply. Instead, he gestured for Francis to begin. "We'd like you to explain a scenario where you had to lead a team under pressure and the results of your decision-making." Francis began, but his words came slower now. I once managed a team during a supply chain breakdown. We had to improvise. It wasn't perfect, but Sarah leaned forward, gently interrupting. "And what did you learn from that?" "Specifically about accountability," Francis faltered. "Well, that sometimes the team needs reassurance more than solutions." Mr. Jacobs scribbled something down. Sarah pressed. "Did you take any responsibility for the breakdown?" Francis hesitated. "Some, but leadership means sharing blame too." There was a moment of silence. Then Sarah asked her final question, calmly but directly. "What qualifies you to lead people whose stories you've never tried to understand?" Francis looked up, as if slapped by words that echoed louder than any mockery he had ever thrown. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Mr. Jacobs nodded. "Thank you. We'll be in touch." As Francis exited, Sarah closed his file gently, not with pride, but with peace. She had asked not for revenge, but for recognition. And now, the tables weren't just turned, they were hers to arrange. The evaluation board met later that evening to finalize placement decisions. Sarah sat at the round table with Mr. Jacobs and two other senior managers. A thick folder bearing Francis's name lay open before her. His credentials looked good on paper, his past roles, certificates, and achievements. But Sarah's eyes weren't focused on the words. She remembered his hesitations during the panel, the evasive answers, the way he sidestepped responsibility under pressure. Mr. Jacobs tapped a pen against the table. "What's your take?" he asked, turning to her. Sarah paused. "He's smart, yes. But smart doesn't equal fit. Leadership demands more than charisma. It requires humility, self-awareness, and growth." The others nodded slowly, reading between the lines. "He has potential," one manager added cautiously. Sarah leaned back. "Potential without discipline is like fire without control. It burns more than it builds." She didn't suggest they reject him outright, but she recommended a lower-level role, one where he could be mentored and monitored. The decision wasn't personal. It was about the values the company claimed to stand for. "Give him a chance to grow into what he thinks he already is," Sarah said, her voice steady. Mr. Jacobs smiled. "That's a fair assessment, and a gracious one." Later that night, Sarah stayed behind to review onboarding schedules. She looked over the names of incoming staff, none familiar, all full of untold stories. As she closed her laptop, she thought not of Francis, but of herself. Of the girl who once feared eye contact, who held her books with soot-stained fingers, who begged her tired feet to stand one more hour. She whispered to the silence of the room, "You made it." And in that moment she knew the past no longer had power, it only held proof. Francis sat on the edge of his hotel bed, hands trembling as he checked his inbox again. The email confirmed it. He'd been offered a position, but far below what he had anticipated. His pride stung. He wasn't used to being the backup plan. The door creaked as his phone buzzed. Gladys. He hesitated, then answered. "Well?" Her voice snapped immediately. "You got the role, right?" Francis exhaled slowly. "Not the one I hoped for," she scoffed. "Are you telling me that corn girl beat you?" Her laugh was dry, bitter. "You promised we were climbing together. Now you're on step 2 while she's at the top." Francis clenched his jaw. "It wasn't like that. She was better, Gladys. She earned it." But Gladys wasn't listening. "And now what? You expect me to sit around and applaud your demotion?" He didn't respond. The silence on the line was louder than her scorn. "You always talked big," she added coldly. "Turns out you only knew how to laugh, not lead." Then the line went dead. Francis stared at the phone, realizing that everything he once mocked, Sarah's grit, her quiet persistence, her refusal to stoop, was the very thing that had elevated her. He had chased applause. She had chased purpose. And now the world had chosen. As he dropped the phone on the bed, he looked out the window toward the skyline. "I should have seen her rising," he whispered to himself. For the first time, there was no anger, no blame, just a heavy acknowledgement that he had laughed his way out of something priceless. Back at her hotel, Sarah sat near the open balcony window, her feet tucked beneath her and her interview folder resting beside her. The city lights blinked in the distance, but her heart was strangely still. Not triumphant, just still. She hadn't cried during the announcement. She hadn't cried during the reversed interview. But now, with everyone gone and silence as her witness, the emotions surged. Tears slipped down her cheeks, soft and steady. They weren't tears of regret or sadness. They were tears of release. "You carried yourself through every laugh, every stumble," she whispered to herself, "and still you stood." The weight of everything, every insult, every night class, every blistered hand poured out in those tears. No one saw this part. No cameras, no applause. Just her alone exhaling years of buried ache. Gloria called just then. Sarah answered with a shaky breath. "I'm crying," she said softly. Gloria's voice was gentle. "You're allowed to. It's the first time you're not fighting." They stayed on the line, saying little. Sometimes all that's needed is someone breathing beside your silence. "Do you know what you've done, Sarah?" Gloria whispered after a while. "You didn't just change your story. You gave permission for 100 other women to believe in theirs." Sarah closed her eyes. "It didn't feel powerful while I was living it. It felt lonely." Gloria replied, "Power always does until people start quoting it." They laughed quietly. When they hung up, Sarah looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Thank you for not letting me break, even when I begged to." That night, she slept without dreams, because reality had finally become enough. The next morning, Sarah was called into a quiet executive lounge on the top floor of the Levant & Co. building. Mr. Jacobs greeted her with a proud smile and gestured toward a polished wooden table laid with contracts and orientation materials. "Sit, Sarah," he said warmly. "You've impressed not only the hiring panel, but the international board. They'd like to give you more than what was initially offered." Sarah blinked, unsure she heard right. It continued, "Along with the regional director position, you're being given full autonomy to lead the recruitment and restructuring of our expansion teams. You'll shape who joins, how we grow, and what values drive us forward." Sarah covered her mouth briefly, emotion rising in her throat. This is more than I imagined." Mr. Jacobs smiled. "That's because what you brought wasn't something we imagined either." They spent the next hour reviewing the formalities. Sarah signed with steady hands, her signature no longer that of a girl who questioned her worth, but of a woman who had earned her place. Before leaving, Mr. Jacobs handed her a gold-plated pen, a small gift from the board. "They said you remind them of a compass, quiet but unwavering." Sarah turned the pen in her hand, overwhelmed. As she walked back to her hotel, she paused at a roadside fruit seller and bought 2 oranges, then handed one to a barefoot boy sitting on a curb. He grinned and she smiled back. "You'll understand one day," she murmured. That evening, she stood by the mirror and tried on the company's official blazer that had been tailored for her. It fit perfectly. Looking into her own reflection, she whispered, "Let this be the beginning of something that lifts others too." Back in her hotel room that night, Sarah opened her inbox to find an email from Madame Ozioma, her academic advisor and the woman who had mentored her through many sleepless nights of virtual learning. The subject line simply read, "I knew you would." She clicked it, and her breath caught at the first sentence. "From your first essay, I saw not just intellect, but grit wrapped in humility. You don't just chase opportunities, Sarah. You create them." The email continued with warmth and pride, recounting how the university had featured Sarah's journey in a newsletter, anonymously at first, but had since asked to publish it fully with her permission. "They want your permission to make your struggle visible," the email said, "because it is the kind that lights lamps in dark places." Sarah clutched the phone to her chest, speechless. At the end of the letter was a scanned copy of a handwritten note Madame Ozioma had added. "From the fire to the boardroom, you carried your crown through ashes. Lead with compassion, not comparison. The world has enough power. It's starving for gentleness." Sarah printed the note and placed it in her suitcase. She folded it neatly and tucked it between her documents. The words didn't inflate her, they grounded her. Later, While sipping warm tea on the hotel balcony, she whispered aloud, "This wasn't just about me. It never was." Her journey had become a map others could now follow. And even though she hadn't planned it, she was beginning to understand that her greatest victories, would be the lives touched by her story, not just the title beside her name. The night wind was cool, carrying with it a sense of peace, not pride. She was no longer reaching. She was ready. Sarah had just finished reviewing a set of internal job postings when a soft knock came at the office door. "Come in," she called without looking up. The door opened slowly, and the voice that followed froze her mid-sentence. "Sarah, can we talk?" She looked up and saw Francis, dressed more simply this time, his confidence dimmed. There was no smugness in his eyes, only hesitation. She didn't speak right away. "I figured you wouldn't want to see me," he added. She gestured to the chair across from her. "You're here, speak." He sat down, wringing his hands. "I was angry before, at you, at myself. But I realize now I lost more than just a title. I lost the one person who saw me before I ever wore a suit." Sarah leaned back, expression unreadable. "And yet you laughed, when I had nothing but corn and hope." Francis lowered his head. "I was small. Afraid. I thought mocking you would prove I'd moved on. But all I did was reveal how empty I was." Silence filled the room. Finally, Sarah spoke. "What do you want from me, Francis? Forgiveness? Validation? Closure?" He shook his head. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. And to thank you. You reminded me what growth looks like." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Apology accepted. But understand something, this version of me didn't rise for revenge. I rose because I refused to stay buried." He nodded, a thin smile on his lips. "You're not the same girl I left." She stood and walked him to the door. "No, Francis, she's long gone. But I thank her for surviving you." As the door closed gently behind him, Sarah stood still for a moment, letting the conversation settle like dust. She wasn't just healing, she was whole. The set lights beamed softly onto the minimalist studio, giving the room an air of polished calm. Sarah sat across from the host of Women Who Rise, a nationally broadcast interview show that featured game changers across Africa. She wore a sleek emerald dress with her hair pulled back, her posture regal yet relaxed. The host, a woman named Amaka Obi, smiled as the cameras rolled. "Today, we have the remarkable Sarah Okafor, Regional Director of Levant & Co., a woman whose journey from ashes to impact is inspiring a continent." Sarah offered a gracious nod. "Thank you for having me." Amaka leaned forward, her tone curious. "You were once overlooked, mocked even. Now you sit at tables you once only imagined. What changed?" Sarah took a breath. "Nothing changed overnight. I just kept walking, one foot in fire, one in faith, until the fire turned to light." The audience listened in silence as she continued. "People think success is about making noise. But sometimes the quietest journeys carry the loudest truths. I wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. I was proving my future right." Amaka's eyes gleamed. "And what would you say to young girls selling fruits, running errands, dreaming quietly?" Sarah smiled, eyes glistening. "Don't rush out of your season. There is no shame in beginnings. Your roots may be planted in hard ground, but your bloom will still find the sun." The studio burst into applause. As the interview closed, Amaka said, "You've made us proud." Sarah stood, shaking her hand. "I only hope my story gives someone else permission to write theirs." Off camera, an intern approached her shyly. "Ma, I grew up roasting plantains with my mum. I never knew women like us could be this." Sarah placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Now you do." Weeks later, Sarah returned to Enugu on a quiet Sunday morning. She didn't come with an entourage or cameras. Just herself, her thoughts, and a small bouquet of sunflowers wrapped in brown paper. The same dusty road greeted her, familiar yet distant. She walked slowly, taking in the scent of burning firewood, the call of hawkers, and the murmur of people going about life. She reached the spot where her stall once stood, now cleared and taken over by wild grass. She knelt, laying the flowers down gently. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being my fire and my foundation." Her gold flats pressed softly into the soil, now worn at the edges but still holding. As she stood, a young woman nearby, seated with a basket of boiled maize, looked up. "Auntie, you used to sell here, Abby?" Sarah nodded. "A long time ago." The girl smiled. "I heard about you. They said you went far. Sarah smiled back. I did, but I never left here. She reached into her purse and handed the girl a small card. When you're ready, apply to this program. They're looking for people just like you. The girl's eyes widened. God bless you, Ma. Sarah walked away slowly, not out of nostalgia, but closure. Every step back was a reminder that her origin wasn't her limitation. It was her testimony. Passing by an old kiosk, a boy whispered to another, "That's the woman from TV, the one who sells hope." Sarah heard it and laughed softly to herself. She didn't need statues or speeches. This was enough. As the morning sun kissed the earth, she took one last look at the road that once broke her, and now bore her name in silent victory. Then she walked on, her head high, her heart whole, and her journey complete. Here's the Bible verse. Job 8 verse 7, "Though thy beginning was small, yet thy latter end should greatly increase." This verse perfectly mirrors Sarah's life, her humble beginnings at a roadside corn stall, her silent struggles, and her eventual elevation to a place of leadership and influence. It reminds us that God often writes his most powerful stories from the dust, not the spotlight. Moral of the story, never despise humble beginnings, and never mock a journey you don't understand. Success isn't always loud. Sometimes it's forged quietly through persistence, prayer, and painful growth. Sarah's story teaches us that real strength is not in appearances, but in resilience. Those who rise with integrity carry more than titles. They carry light for others still walking their path. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for